Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is David Redas. I am the CHCI Wells Fargo Housing Graduate Fellow, and I am currently placed with the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. I am delighted to be here with you today for the Future of American Infrastructure, Transportation, and Manufacturing session. And on behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank Charter Communications, Micron, General Motors, Union Pacific, and Comcast, NBC Universal, Telemundo for their generous support for this session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce welcoming remarks from Virginia Sigras. She is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs at Charter Communications. Her experience in communication includes her services as Vice President of Government Relations for NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Please welcome Virginia Sigras.
Hi, all. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to see a full house. My name's Virginia Sigras, and as he mentioned, I'm here representing Charter Communications and really wanted to welcome you today to this really important panel talking about America's infrastructure. And we're going to hear from really great speakers who are talking about it from a lot of different sectors. At Charter, we are representing the broadband sector. America's broadband networks really have been an infrastructure success story. The cable broadband industry rose up and met that challenge during the COVID pandemic. And a lot of that was really because we had spent years of continued investment to keep our networks at peak performance and staying ahead of consumer demand and needs. We were able to continue offering gigabit speeds to over 80% of American households across the country. As this pandemic set in, and fortunately, we're hopefully nearing the end of it, but we saw that the cable industry really stood up and worked around the clock to monitor the demands that were placed on the networks, to add capacity where consumers needed it, to make sure that kids could do homework and schoolwork from their living rooms, people could work from their home offices, and that we all could stay connected to the people that we loved and cared about. And at Charter, we were really proud to be part of that American infrastructure story. Charter is a cable operator and a broadband connectivity company offering internet, video, mobile, and voice services under the brand name Spectrum to more than 32 million customers in 41 states. So we know a lot about broadband, and over the last 5 years, we've invested over $40 billion in infrastructure and technology, contributing significantly to the US economy. And really, that investment's paid off because Spectrum Internet ranks #1 in rural internet services, according to US News and World Reports. Charter recently made a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar construction initiative to add over 100,000 miles of fiber optic network to deliver gigabit speeds to more than 1 million unserved households. Those are people who don't have broadband today. And to build this infrastructure, we're going to be hiring thousands of employees. All of our employees across the board are going to have minimum wages of at least $20 an hour, and that's a commitment we made to our employees as they stepped up during the COVID pandemic, and we're stepping up for them. By deploying high-speed broadband to more people, this cable industry is really empowering them to thrive in the 21st century, regardless of whether they live in a small town or an urban center. We're looking to drive economic growth and power opportunity, leading to stronger and more equitable economies. So today's panel is going to give you a great opportunity to hear about how these investments across different sectors are impacting the changing landscape of America. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of these panelists today. So wanted to welcome them all and thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Virginia. Let's get our discussion started on American infrastructure. Our moderator leading this engaging discussion is Megan Pereiro, Associate Editor of Mass Transit Magazine. Megan Pereiro is an award-winning business-to-business journalist and associate editor. She provides content for transit newsletters and social media, along with online and print content. She is currently a board member for Latinos in Transit and serves on the APTA Marketing and Communications Committee. Please welcome Megan Pereiro.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. So excited that you guys are here with us. I am also thankful for CHCI to host this session, The Future of American Infrastructure, Transportation, and Manufacturing. So as you may know, the bipartisan infrastructure law is providing high levels of funding for the nation to address a backlog of infrastructure needs, ranging from roads and bridges to transit and passenger rail, as well as delivering high-speed internet to every family in America, delivering cheaper and cleaner energy to households and businesses, and creating good-paying jobs along with other investments. So today we'll discuss what needs to be in place to fully capitalize on this funding to make America competitive in the global economy for the 21st century. And I am delighted to be joined by 4 experts today. Please welcome Adrian Guerrero, Assistant Vice President of Public Affairs for Union Pacific Railroad, located in Roseville, California. Prior to this role, Adrian was General Director of Network Development, where he was responsible for leading franchise growth opportunities, public-private partnerships, passenger rail development, and strategic initiatives across UP's Western region. I'm also welcoming Noel Perez. Noel serves as Director of Government Affairs at General Motors, helping achieve an all-electric future with 0 crashes, 0 emissions, and 0 congestion. Please also welcome David Don. David serves as Senior Vice President for Public Policy at Comcast Corporation. He is responsible for developing and implementing the company's strategies before federal and state governments. Last, certainly not least, welcome to Bo Machayo. Bo is the Director of Federal Government and Public Affairs for Micron Technology. He has extensive experience as a public policy and engagement advisor with stakeholders and elected officials at the local, state, and federal governments. We will have time for Q&A during the session. You can also tweet your comments about the session at #CHCIHHM22. So to get us started today, I would like to ask the panelists, what do you think needs to be done to prepare for true, connected, smart cities? And how are your companies and industries approaching this? Adrian, I would like to have you start us off.
Sure, and thanks again for hosting us on this great panel. I never thought that supply chain, transportation, or railroads would be a sexy topic in my career here at UP, but lo and behold, the last 2.5 years has really brought some important topics to the forefront, and we really see this kind of playing out over the past year as we're coming out of this pandemic, but you see the absolute need on supply chain in the way that the demand has evolved. And Virginia touched on it. How do you bring that demand to our customer base? And you're going to have 2 kind of demands out there, and we really focus on our capital investments and then our human capital investment. And so just a little background on Union Pacific. We run over 32,000 miles of track. We have over 32,000 employees, and we operate in 23 states west of the Mississippi. So primarily a Western-based railroad, largest Class 1 out there. And as we have been focusing on that investment, our right-of-way, our tracks are the physical plant. Think of just this massive conveyor belt where we're going from yard to yard and facility to facility for our customers. And that takes a lot of investment. So on average, we're spending about $4 billion a year just on capital maintenance of our right-of-way. That doesn't include the workforce component. And up until, I'd say 9 months ago, we were really strong on workforce. And so that is really kind of the theme that we're focused on here is how do you meet this demand? When you're talking about smart cities and the connectivity, we're focused on that workforce development. So right now we are in hiring, the largest hiring mode that I've seen in my 10 years at UP, and really focused on our transportation employees that we rely on in order to move those trains from point A to point B. When you look at that equipment, we see the evolution of the equipment itself too. And there's so much discussion on electrifying the right-of-way, electrifying all this equipment. And there's some really difficult conversations going on right now between policy holders as well as community organizations and private companies across the U.S. on what are those needs and how are you going to be able to address that demand. So we have a lot of exciting investments that I could talk about later on, but we're looking at battery electric locomotives that we purchased recently. looking at electrifying a couple of our intermodal yards, which a big primary focus as we see that continued demand on the intermodal front, all this e-commerce moving around. How do we make those investments at the yards and do it in a smart way that really what I see and why it's important to talk about it here is focus on Latino communities. So I'm joined by Lupe Valdez and Raquel Espinosa with UP. And in each of their territories, which is Southern California and on the border in Texas, we see how those investments make a big impact on the local communities. And so that's something on how we're thinking about from a workforce standpoint, hiring from local communities and making investments that are not going to have a negative impact on those communities.
Absolutely. Noel, how is General Motors approaching the true connected smart cities?
Well, as it was just discussed, we all must do our part. When you look at the latest data, it shows that in 1990, 50% of Latinos lived in suburbs. That number has increased to 60%. And as we focus on our vehicles, we want to make sure there's options for everyone. And I think about my mom when she first came. She lived in Los Angeles, East LA, and in the city, she used public transportation. And now she's very fortunate enough where she lives in a single-family home in the suburbs. So vehicles are a necessity in her life, her day-to-day. So what we're looking at is what you touched on, our 000 ambition, which is to go all electric by 2035. And when you look at, as we electrify our vehicles, we're also looking at autonomy. Autonomous vehicles, we have our Cruise company based out of San Francisco. Currently, if you're in San Francisco, you can download the app, you can hail one of these robo-taxis and get from point A to point B in SF with no driver on board. And we just recently announced that we're actually expanding by the end of the year to Phoenix and Austin. And the last thing I want to talk about is e-delivery. We all know, we purchase things online quite a bit, and there's a lot of congestion there. So we have a company called BrightDrop. We've partnered with Walmart and FedEx, where we're providing these services, which is all electric, where we're able to do the last mile of the actual package delivery. So those are just a couple initiatives that we're working on.
Fantastic, thank you. David, how does Comcast fit into this smart connected city?
Well, thank you for having me, Megan and CHCI. Happy to hear talk about broadband. If you're talking about smart cities, you got to be talking about broadband. And unlike maybe some of these other aspects of smart cities, we're pretty far along in the broadband space. Virginia mentioned, broadband is really the success story coming out of COVID, right? Whatever we did was on a broadband network when we were at home, whether it's work from home, school from home, right? All of that was done over broadband networks that had been built over the previous 20 years, mostly through private capital investment. And what we saw at Comcast was a 40% increase in traffic overnight, and our networks were able to handle it. So I think in America, unlike what we talk about sometimes in infrastructure, whether it's crumbling roads and crumbling bridges and the need to invest in innovations, broadband's already there in much of the country, but it isn't there everywhere. And that's what we really need to focus on, and that's what Congress is focusing on the Infrastructure Act. We know that about 80% of Americans are connected to broadband. But what you learned during COVID, if you didn't know it ahead of time, is 100% need to be connected. And we at Comcast have known that for a while. We've had subsidy programs for low-income Americans to get them connected and supported rural broadband deployment where possible. But we now have, coming out of COVID, is the opportunity to get to 100%. And I mentioned 20% or so of Americans aren't connected, either because they lack access or because they're not getting signed up when it is available to them for a variety of reasons. In the Latino community, it's actually even higher. It's about 35% of Latinos are not connected to a broadband connection in their home. But Congress has seen this problem and has allocated at least 50 billion and maybe as much as 80, depending on how you look at it, to get everyone connected. And so what we need to do is figure out where people aren't connected and why people aren't subscribing and start addressing those challenges. And we're well on our way. There's efforts to map our country's broadband, which will be critical to know where we need to deploy it. And then we have all kinds of programs involved in getting people connected. Because the biggest problem is not deploying broadband to these rural areas. That's a challenge and an expensive challenge. But there are millions of Americans, millions of Latinos who have broadband available to them and they're not subscribing, sometimes for price, sometimes because they don't think it's relevant to them. They're not understanding how important it is for civic engagement, for commerce and education. And there are a lot of other challenges we saw. There's housing instability and all kinds of challenges of getting people connected. But fortunately, we have more money than we ever could have imagined dedicated to this problem. And so we've got to make sure we're spending our resources wisely. And when we look back, hopefully 5 years from now, we're going to have everyone online, that last 20% connected. And that's critical to making smart cities, connected government, and everything else.
Absolutely. And Bo, how is Micron approaching the smart connected cities?
Thanks for the question, and thanks CHCI for having me. Just as background, Micron is the only American memory semiconductor manufacturer in this country. We're the second largest semiconductor manufacturer in this country and the fourth largest in the world. And like many of my panelists have also said, we saw the importance of the supply chain and semiconductor manufacturing and the need to have that supply chain being made here in America and with other allies. And so Congress has been working on and recently passed the CHIPS and Science Act, which would increase the amount of semiconductor manufacturers here in this country. And as a result of that, Micron was able to make an announcement of about that will invest $40 billion here in the US and have around 40,000 jobs. And so when we think about what smart cities really are, we see that memory goes from everywhere, from your cell phone to your cars to the tractors that folks use across this country. And so when you're building a more resilient, energy, sustainable, friendly, smart city, you do need those semiconductor chips that are very much necessary. And as we see memory continue to grow in the market share and the importance of memory semiconductor manufacturing particularly, we see the nexus of smart cities, kind of clean technology going hand in hand to making sure that all communities, not just those in major cities, but throughout socioeconomic and diverse backgrounds, have the ability to have smart cities housed in their communities. And so that's how Micron sees it.
Fantastic, thank you. And Bo, you touched on this a bit in your opening statement, but clearly the industries are all interconnected in some way or another. So where do you see partnership opportunities between industries and across the private and public sector to address some of the supply issues?
So like I had just mentioned, government has seen and really wanted to focus in on where can we become more resilient as a result of the pandemic. And so the CHIPS and Science Act really presents an opportunity not only to make sure that we're providing more jobs to Americans throughout diverse communities and really making sure that we're also investing in our education system, but it allows for us to also manufacture these semiconductor chips here in this country. And so whether it's, we have a couple of different fabs here in the United States, one in Manassas, Virginia, which does a lot of the legacy chips. And so legacy chips go from everything from your automobile and as those automobiles become more autonomous, more environmentally friendly, you see the importance of those, the importance of the chips being made here as an important factor. And so we continue to work hand in hand with government, both with Congress and the administration, not only to make sure that we're diversifying the workforce that's available, and we're also investing in communities that have historically been underserved as well. And so making sure that we're investing in whole ecosystems. And so not only just providing the job, but what are the other community benefits that are associated with that, whether that be housing, whether that be your education system. And those are ways that the government and the private sector can continue to invest hand in hand in, incentivizing, this production here domestically helps kind of grow not only the semiconductor ecosystem, but also the job network as well.
Fantastic. And David, how do you see Comcast fitting in with addressing some of the supply chain issues that we've been having?
Sure. So everything about getting this last 25% connected is going to involve partnerships. I mentioned Congress allocated about $80 billion. So 42 billion is in the IIJA, the Infrastructure Act, and the remaining 40 billion or so is probably going to come from ARPA. And the way that is going to be administered is through public-private partnerships. Congress has essentially given the states block grants where they're going to be applying or setting up applications for private companies like Comcast to apply for federal subsidies to build out broadband in unserved areas of this country. And that's going to take a lot of money. But the other side of the public-private partnership, or maybe not public-private, but partnerships, is how are we going to get that last 20% connected that has it available to them? So there's a concept called digital navigators, where we're going to be working with folks who are going to go door to door. And they're going to try to explain to people the importance of getting connected and of the subsidy programs that are out there to make it more affordable to some folks. There's a lot of money and resources out there. And these digital navigators are going to play a key role in connecting folks. And on the infrastructure side, the building new ones, and I think to your question on semiconductors, I guess, or supply chain, we are very much in favor of a lot of the work in the CHIPS Act, and there's other work going on to make sure that we have the equipment and labor available to us for this huge construction project we're going to undertake. But at Comcast, we have over 150,000 employees. We've been doing this for a very long time. We bring a tremendous amount of scale to the problem. So we feel pretty good that when we look back in a few years, we're going to see some real advancements in broadband deployment and adoption.
Fantastic. And Noel, as GM works to its 0, 0, 0, where are you also finding opportunities for partnerships?
Yeah, just on this whole supply chain issue, there's two things you talked about. CHIPS Act, $52 billion to incentivize domestic manufacturing of these fabs, and $2 billion of that is for the legacy chips, which is for autos. And we were very happy for that because, as you're well aware, your vehicle has over 1,000 chips as you drive, over 1,000. And as we transition to EVs, we're going to double that. So we need a whole lot more chips in your vehicles. So it's extremely important that we got that done. So, but what are we doing when it comes to supply chain? So, we're investing quite a bit of money, billions of dollars, to renovate our plants to produce these EVs. But we're also building batteries here at home. We've announced 3 battery plants: Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee. Ohio went live 2 weeks ago. We have 900 employees there. It will increase to 1,300, and they're building our batteries for our EVs. And then Tennessee, and then Michigan, and we've yet to announce 2 more additional battery plants. I think a focus is also critical minerals. What we're doing here is we're onshoring, right? We're focused on building it here in America. So we partnered in California in the Salton Sea. Likely none of you have been there, but there's one thing in the Salton Sea that they have, and it's lithium. Lithium powers our batteries. So we partnered with a refinery, with a extraction company, multi-million-dollar investment for lithium. So we are making it here in the U.S., in California, where we're not depending on others. So those are just a couple of items.
Perfect. And UP, big player in our supply chain. How are you also looking for partnership opportunities to alleviate some of the stress that our supply chain is experiencing?
I still can't get over 1,000 chips per vehicle. And we're also focused on the Imperial County because we're hoping that a lot of that lithium is going to be transported by rail. Right. So if I go back to what I talked about in terms of the capital investment and the human capital, the partnership opportunities that are available there on the infrastructure front, right? We also have identified, public funding through IIJA. So of that package, $66 billion was identified for freight and passenger rail. The vast majority of that identified on the passenger front. But in order for passenger rail to grow and optimize their existing services, they're likely going to have to operate on freight tracks. And in order for us to do that in a thoughtful way, you have to build the right level of capacity. And so if we only have 2 sets of tracks that are handling X amount of freight traffic on there, and in order for a community like Coachella or Indio that goes to Riverside and eventually Imperial County, they're going to have to build a 3rd track, right? So that investment to get to leverage our private funds with public funds will help bring those benefits to fruition a lot sooner. So you're going to be focused on goods movement alignment, as well as the movement of folks, right, that want to get from point A to point B. And so we think that there's some low-hanging fruit opportunities there on the partnerships. And on the workforce front, we're partnering and trying to build new talent pipelines, community colleges, and other alternative education. Also looking at second chance hiring with a huge focus on DEI, right? And I know DEI is another buzzword, but that is the future of where UP is going to go in order to meet our long-term workforce demands. Especially in the Latino community, we've grown to 15% of our workforce population is now Latino, and we see that number continuing over the next 5 and 10 years. And so partnering with a host of nonprofit organizations, as well as educational institutions and government, and also on the capital side with passenger agencies and road authorities out there that are looking to make improvements to the right-of-way.
Fantastic. And Adrian beat me to the punch. My next question was going to be, how are your companies investing in the workforce as you embark on these big projects? And not only invest in your workforce, but thoughtfully and intentionally, and you're recruiting a big group of people to come and work with you.
Yeah. So let me just pick up where I left off and just add, the railroad industry is one of the very few industries remaining in the US where somebody with a high school diploma or a GED can come and earn 6 figures in their first year. And that is a story that has not been told well, and one that is quickly being developed and optimized, highlighted on a number of fronts because we need to fill that void. We know it's not easy working for a railroad, right? It's a 24/7 operation. You're in the heat, you're in the cold, and we do everything we can to protect our employees to make it a good working environment because of the need behind it. But at the same time, how can we start looking at an old model that is full-time work and start contemplating part-time work? Can we do part-time dispatching to meet our peak season demands, which starts right now and goes through January? Again, that's a supply chain demand. And so how do we tap that, knowing what's out there and growing the different, not just compensation, but benefits packages for our employees that are going to make it attractive and attainable and see it as a long-term career option. That's what we're really capitalizing right now. So again, big focus on DEI and big focus on second chance hiring.
Fantastic. And Noel,
Yes.
in addition to investing in recruitment, how are you ensuring that the people you have now are going to have the skills needed to continue staying with the company?
Yes, that's right. As we transition, there's going to be a lot of training. Just to give you a big picture, we're close to 100,000 employees here in the United States. We're at over 110 facilities across 27 states. So it's quite a bit. There's a lot going on. And, I think what we've witnessed is during COVID, there was this need for additional hiring, and it was a little difficult to get to. So we recently announced we're dropping the 4-year degree requirement, where it is focused on skill sets. Not everyone in our community can afford a 4-year degree or can attend. I'm the first and only one in my family to attend and graduate at a university. So it's extremely important, especially in our community. I do want to talk about STEM. STEM education is extremely important. Since 2017, we've invested $10 million a year to nonprofits that focus on STEM education K through 12. It's extremely important because these are folks that are going to be working at our company. There is LULAC that we all know. We've partnered with them. We have the a GM program there that focuses on middle school students for STEM education. And I also want to talk about workforce. So as we talk about how are we recruiting, I was just in Phoenix 2 weeks ago. I was in Chandler, Phoenix. We have a facility there of 1,300 employees. It's one of our IT centers. And as you're well aware, in Phoenix, you have a big university. You have ASU. So we continue to have pipelines, not just with local state governments, but with educational institutions like ASU. So, we try to check every single box to make sure that we're well staffed and we're ready for the future.
Fantastic. And David, where is Comcast looking to expand its workforce as well?
Before I jump in workforce, if I can pick up on those STEM education.
Absolutely.
We have been at the forefront ensuring that students are connected to broadband. And during the pandemic, we began a program called the LIFT program, where we opened up, we're now at like over 1,000 community centers where we give broadband, where we provide broadband connectivity, as well as digital education to students. It's key that they have that connectivity. The challenge is many of them have this device, which is a wonderful device, right? And in fact, we have over 5 million customers with this one too. But really to do that education from home, we need a more robust connection, more robust experience. And that's where the broadband connection comes in. So when we're at these community centers, if you can't get broadband connectivity to the home, if they're challenging them, this is a safe place to go and get a robust connection with a computer or an iPad or something more robust than just the mobile phone. So it's really hard to get the students, I think, off of these. But for education, it's critical. This is a great device, but it's not for applying for jobs very easily. And it is definitely not for educating very easily. So that STEM point is key, and broadband connectivity is at the heart of, I think, that STEM program outside of education. As far as workforce goes, boy, we have, like I said, we have about 150,000 employees in the US of all kinds, right? You can have someone who's laying cable, laying fiber, customer service representatives. And then we have tens of thousands of engineers, right? So we're constantly at the cutting edge of innovation and technology. So we have in place and have had in place for years education programs. We actually have more software engineers than network engineers, even though we're called a cable company. We're much more going on in the innovative side. And so there's a lot of re-educating, giving people opportunities to advance their education. Bo and I were just joking. One of my colleagues came to my office and said, I'm getting a PhD right now. It's like, go ahead. So, company paid for it. So that we're big into education and giving people the opportunity to learn more and to advance their understanding of the network and of our business and taking new opportunities within the company. At the same time, the industry is going to have significant challenges in building this new networks that need to be built. There is obviously a labor crunch right now, which is a great opportunity for people looking for work and getting into new businesses. These are typically well-compensating jobs, as Virginia mentioned. So we are obviously looking to make sure we have the employees necessary to finish this broadband build-out that we're going to need in this country.
And Bo, how has Micron's hiring practices evolved, and how do you see them growing as you also look to expand your workforce?
Yeah, so I'd like to reiterate and second all the comments on STEM and the education portion of it too. As we have announced our 40,000 jobs, we're looking at the full kind of continuum of of our workforce and making sure that we're investing not only in kind of community colleges, university systems, but also how are we really kind of digging deep into our K through 12 education system as well. And so we've started these things. A lot of folks don't consider the semiconductor industry as tech. And so how do we really get the next generation of workers to really see semiconductor manufacturing as a part of tech and as a part of STEM. And so we've started these things called chip camps, where we've been going across not only our footprint areas, but across the entire country, really kind of talking about what is a chip. Not many folks and not many, I for sure didn't know how many chips were in a phone or a laptop or my TV or my mom's car growing up. And so the ability to say, hey, this is what is possible, and we need everybody from a full continuum of education levels, from your person on your person constructing the fabs to the folks with advanced degrees who are the ones defying Moore's law. And so I was just in Purdue University yesterday with Secretary Blinken and Secretary Raimondo, and really kind of talking about really making sure that we're diversifying our workforce, not only in minority communities, but in rural places as well. And really, how are we partnering with education systems all the way from K through 12 to community colleges to MSIs to kind of your advanced degrees, and how is industry partnering with to make sure that not only folks have access to these high-paying jobs, but also get to be a part of an industry that's growing and emerging here in this country. And so as as Micron continues to grow, and we recently last week, or actually earlier this week, did an official groundbreaking with the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, and the OSTP Director, Alondra Nelson, and really talking about how we're diversifying our workforce is going to be an important aspect as we continue to grow and continue to make more announcements of where we're going to be putting these semiconductor fabs here in the U.S.
And going to go off of one of the words that you just mentioned, access, as we're expanding our workforce. Latinos in the United States report specific transportation issues to access their jobs as a result of the disparity between where they live and where they work. And these issues can include transit fare affordability, reliability, safety, among other things. So how can the private sectors and your companies work to help address some of these barriers?
Well, I can kick that off. Again, when most people think of Union Pacific, you're thinking about a freight railroad. And little do they know that we have a very significant, robust passenger and commuter system on our network. And that starts really in Chicago and goes all the way to California. And it's a very successful model that we've recreated over and over. Amtrak is a very different system than that, but from a commuter passenger standpoint, on how we built it out, those are the types of the planning development that goes into identifying a station, what that location is going to be. In a particular environment. Luke and I are working right now with Metrolink and LA Metro down in Southern California, where they want to expand a blue line, and that would expand on UP, an industrial line, right, that has freight kind of weekly service, but it's not to the same aspect of a major mainline operation. And so we're trying to figure out ways of accommodating